All right, I am live. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are all having a good weekend. I certainly am. And I'm glad to be back on here to just talk to whoever stops in and see whoever uh, wants to bring something into the chat. Um, I'm looking forward to it. And today's episode is going to be uh, very much out of the ordinary from anything else I've done thus far. And back in the early days of Hex, there was a person that I became acquainted with who goes by the name of Joe Hexotic. And I haven't seen him for a while online. I think he got involved with some kind of NFT project uh, in recent times. But I talked to Joe several times in the beginning, and eventually I met up with him in Las Vegas when we had the first Hex conference there that Matty Allen hosted. And I have picture here of Joe and I that I thought I'd share from the one event at the Marquee nightclub. A whole bunch of people were there. And so, yeah, met up with Joe. And later during that event, a guy named the Big Herkowski hosted a party at a high rise there in Vegas. And Joe was there and we hung out a little bit more, got to talking. Him and I have a lot in common. So just got to know each other really well. And then the following year at the event at Daytona for the Daytona 500, Matty Allen rented an Airbnb. And one night, Joe and I and Matty and another man named Toby One Hexobi, we all hung out at Matty's rental for a while and just talked about a variety of things. But when Joe was streaming, at the beginning, there was a stream that he was hosting that he referred to as the Hex Church. And a couple people would go on there from time to time who are believers, and they would just talk about different things. I remember Freddie Quotes was on that stream a couple of times, and so was a guy who went by the name of Crypto Vince, who I happened to run into in Daytona. But so yeah, this was a stream that Joe was hosting for a while. And let's see. Anyway, what I'm going to be doing from now on for Saturday's stream is going to be something similar to that, but not entirely. And I have a statement here that I want to read. It says that this book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth, but you shall meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then your way shall be made prosperous, and you shall have good success. Let's see. Anyway, I'm not sure how well the YouTube stream is picking up, but I'm just going to keep going forward with this anyway. But this book of the law that is being referred to in this statement is actually referring to the book of Deuteronomy, which is the fifth book of Moses. This statement that I just read was actually from the book of Joshua, which Joshua was the successor of Moses. But it's interesting that it says here that this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth. It doesn't say this book of religion. And that is because there's a difference between law and religion. The books of Moses are not they're not religious books. It's the book of the law. And it's interesting that the word religion only appears in the Bible twice. And it's in the same letter that's written by a man named James. It's in the New Testament. But that's the only time that the word religion even appears in the Bible itself. The writers of the Bible tend to refer to it as the book of the law, particularly the Old Testament. And the definition of the word law is that which is laid down, that which is established, that which cannot be removed. True law can't be overturned. It can't be amended. It can't be repealed because it is what is. So, for example, we have examples of this in nature. The law of gravity is one. People can complain about it all they want, but there's nothing people can do to make gravity cease to function. We can build machines like airplanes and work in relationship to the law of gravity by introducing laws of aerodynamics, but that doesn't cause gravity to cease to function. So you compare that with religion, on the other hand. The English word religion is actually a transliteration of a Latin word. It has the prefix re, and then the base word is ligio. And the word ligio is where we get the English word ligament. A ligament, if you're familiar with human anatomy, is what binds your muscle to your bones. So the word religion means to rebind, to bind again. And really, it isn't the will of God for us to be in bondage at all. We are to know the truth and to be free. So, one of the reasons for bringing this up at this time rather than any time previously is brought out in the law itself. And there's one particular aspect of the law that I want to share here that goes along with why this is. And as I said, the book of the law that Joshua was specifically referring to is the book of Deuteronomy. And in this book, the 10 Commandments are reiterated because this is the book that Moses wrote before he died. He wasn't allowed to enter into the land of Canaan. So before he died, he writes this last book that kind of is a reminder of everything that happened to the children of Israel from the time they were delivered out of their Egyptian bondage up until this time. But in the 10 Commandments, the fourth commandment says, and this is how it's quoted in the book of Deuteronomy, this is chapter 5, it says here, keep the Sabbath day to sanctify it, as the Lord thy God hath commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, thou, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your ox, nor your ass, nor any of your cattle, nor the stranger that is within your gates, that the manservant and the maidservant may rest, as well as thou. And remember that thou was a servant in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord thy God brought thee out thence through a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commands you to keep the Sabbath day. So, essentially, today, according to the calendar, is the Sabbath day. And as a result, that is why the nature of the content that I'm going to be talking about today is not going to be the same as it has been for the 6 previous days, because today is the day to rest from that work. And so I'm not going to be talking about crypto. I'm not going to be looking at price charts. Not going to be talking about any other businesses out there. And I'm not going to be doing the whole Hexagon of the Day award like I do on the other days, because today is the Sabbath day. And today is the day to rest and to simply rejoice in the fact that the successful society that I keep talking about in these live streams is really already here. It's just a matter of people recognizing it for what it is and being willing to participate in it. And the whole point of observing the Sabbath is to testify to this fact and to testify of your relationship in regard to this successful society. That's part of why it says here, keep the Sabbath day to sanctify it. To sanctify something means to set it aside, to relate to it in a way that is unique to how you relate to everything else. And it's interesting. The state of the world as it was for our first parents in the Garden of Eden, really, that is the successful society. It's like the first two chapters of the book of Genesis really are the constitution of nature and the earth in general. It tells us the state of being and the relationship with all of the creatures in regard to one another. And, I've said before, the word constitution means state of being. So the first two chapters of Genesis tells us what the state of being of the original creation was. It wasn't until our first parents made a decision that put them in a position where they would assert themselves as deciding what is good and what is evil, what is true and what is false, that suddenly there was a change in the constitution of creation. And as it turns out, it's like the entire rest of the Bible would not have needed to have been written in the first place if our first parents would not have done that. So because they did, here we are today. We have to deal with things like death and corruption and evil and all of this stuff. But I want to stop here for a moment because I noticed some people are coming in, and I just wanted to recognize Mr. Red Squirrel, who asks, "How's it going, Tim?" And I would say it's going very, very well. I don't know if you caught the opening of what I was saying in the last 15 minutes, but the nature of my stream on Saturday is going to be different than on the other 6 days of the week, because as I was sharing earlier ago, today is the Sabbath day, according to the Bible. And because of how I relate to that, the content that I'm going to be sharing on Saturdays is not going to be the same on the other 6 days of the week, because today is different. Today is set apart for a different use. And this is what I was elaborating on prior to your arrival. So to go forward with that, when our first parents had to leave their garden home, they were allowed to take two things with them to remind them of that ideal original habitat. One of those things was the institution of marriage. And the second thing was the seventh day Sabbath, which I'm talking about here. The fourth commandment of the 10 commandments tells us to honor the Sabbath day, to set it apart and to keep it holy. And I do that in my personal life, and therefore I'm carrying that over into how I conduct these live streams also. So, as I had already said, I'm not going to be talking about crypto or price charts or businesses or anything that I would normally talk about. And the reason for that being the point that I'd made earlier is that the successful society that I keep talking about every day is really already here. And it's just a matter of each of us individually being able to recognize that and being willing to partake of that. And by respecting the Sabbath day for what it is, I believe that helps put us in a place where we can recognize this for what it is. But anyway, in the 12th chapter of the book of Genesis, we have a man named Abraham. That was eventually what his name would become. His name originally was Abram. And he was called by God to leave his homeland. And he was given a promise. And it says that I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you, make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless them that bless you and curse him that curses you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, it's interesting, this word family is actually a word that describes a system of government. The family unit is the most basic, most fundamental power structure that there is. And your family oh, here we go. Sorry about that. I am dealing with some seriously inclement weather where I live, and my stream went blank and gave me a little pinwheel, and wasn't sure what to do about that besides wait. But anyway, looks like I'm back. Let me check. Okay. Anyway, back to what I was saying about the family. The family unit is the most basic system of government that there is. And the more the family is overthrown and disbanded, the more of an opportunity that creates for the state to intrude in the lives of others. So, it was the purpose of this call of this man, Abraham, to be a blessing to the families of the earth. And this promise that was given to him was restated to his son, Isaac. And then it was also reestablished in the life of his grandson, Jacob. And Jacob later in life had an experience that resulted in his name being changed to Israel. So this is where the name Israel comes from that you hear about on the news today, even though, one could argue about the continuity of Israel today compared to the Israel of Bible times, but I don't want to open up that can of worms at this point now. My point being is that the children of Israel ended up having to go into Egypt to basically prolong their lives. And as a result of being there over time, they ended up having to go into servitude to the Egyptian government. And as a result, they weren't allowed to observe the Sabbath. They weren't allowed to rest. They were enslaved. And so they also lost the knowledge of the God of their fathers. They were subjected to the idols of the Egyptian culture. And so as a result of not knowing who their God was, that's why they had to be taken into the wilderness where the Ten Commandments were given to them, because the Ten Commandments are essentially a transcript of God's character. That's one of the reasons they say, thou shalt not do this, that, and the other, because those behaviors are a contradiction to God's character. But at the heart of the commandments is the observance of the Sabbath day. Because, again, as I said, the Sabbath is something that our first parents were allowed to take with them when they left their garden home, to serve as a reminder of what their habitat was originally meant to be. So again, this is why I personally observe the Sabbath day, and I'm implementing that into my live streams. So just as a heads up, when I stream on Saturdays, it's basically going to be a Bible study hour compared to the other 6 days of the week, because this is what I do, particularly on this day. So with that, I want to share with you another statement in relationship to the Sabbath day. And this is something that one of the prophets who came along centuries later had to say about this subject. And this is the 58th chapter of the book of the prophet Isaiah. And this says, if you turn your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, not finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words, then you shall delight yourself in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. So the significance of this statement about taking your foot from the Sabbath, the foot is in prophecy that represents claiming ownership of something. So what the prophet is telling us here is, if you stop claiming ownership of the Sabbath, recognize it for what it is, as God's holy day, and if you honor him, don't do your own thing, don't be selfish, don't make life about your own pleasure, and don't even speak your own words. Let the truth just flow through you. Then we're told that there's two blessings that come to people for doing this that are described as riding on the high places of the earth and being fed with the heritage of Jacob, your father. And of course, Jacob being the grandson of Abraham. And I personally have had two experiences in my life that I identify with these two blessings. Um, this riding upon the high places of the earth is something that became clear to me in the year 2020 when I woke up on Sunday, April the 19th, with the knowing that I'd basically become independently wealthy, that my commitments to the things that were given to me regarding the usage of hex and stuff had come to their fruition. Even though on the surface it didn't look that way. And the fact is, I was still working to pay for life and stuff. I woke up with the knowing that this promise had been fulfilled. And really, this has been a description of my life ever since. It's like I'm not entangled with the affairs of this world. That's what riding upon the high places of the earth is talking about, is not getting caught up in all of this worldly drama and dysfunction and all of that. And usually in many employment situations that, you know, tends to come up in a lot of conversation, especially if you work in like a corporate environment and you're just, it's like a bunch of rats in a cage, and it's, it tends to uh, create drama. But this being fed with the heritage of Jacob is another thing that was fulfilled in my life back in 2012, uh, when I just had this experience that brought me to a place where I just suddenly had an identity. I knew who I was in relationship to who God is. And how that actually came to be was in October of 2012. This is October 25th, to be precise. Um, a younger guy that I was working with at the time had invited me over to another friend's house to watch a series of videos that they had that revolved around this man making this presentation before a body of students. It was more of a philosophical thing. He's basically making a philosophical case for what he called Christianity before these students. And um, at one point, he's talking about how people naturally view the world as, and humanity as being inherently good. And he's presenting all these evidences for that. But then he contrasts that with what he said was the Bible's view of man as being fallen and needing a savior. And just as he said that, I literally heard a literal voice speak to my mind, not to my ear, that said, wait a minute. Uh, I've read the Bible, and the spirit that I'm of tells me that the Bible's view of man is that man is the son of God because he has a savior. And I had read the Bible myself several times, and I knew soon as I heard that voice that that was the truth, even though I'd never looked at it that way before. I agreed with that voice. And because I did, a shift happen in my entire life's experience. It's like literally the finger of God came down and the whole world just turned into the Garden of Eden. It's like everything about life suddenly made sense. Everything about people suddenly made sense. It's like I suddenly understood why everybody is the way they are, because I suddenly knew why I am the way that I've literally been my whole life. And life has never been the same ever since then. It's just everything to me is cut and dry. Everything just is the perfect outworking of the law of cause and effect. And I relate that to the fulfillment of this promise that is given to those who take their foot from the Sabbath and call it a delight. And it's interesting, this whole notion of the Sabbath was not something that I was raised with. Um, our family, we went to a church every Sunday for like the first 13 years of my life. And it really was not a life defining experience for me. It was just there. But my heart was drawn to want to know the truth about it all. You know, who God is, what is church? Why does it exist? What's the point? And um, there was no immediate answer to this prayer that I was capable of recognizing. I can look back over my life and realize that, yeah, that was answered at that time. I just wasn't in a place where I was able to recognize it. I've had to grow into the knowledge of seeing these things for what they are. But this whole notion of the Sabbath was never came up. I mean, I think my first introduction to the subject of the Sabbath was when I was a teenager and I heard about a band called Black Sabbath. And I had no idea what that was talking about, but it sounded cool. Their music was okay. I think the title of the band was better than some of their songs. But yeah, I remember asking my one grandmother, my mom's mother, about the subject, and she didn't really have anything to say about it except to say that it's Sunday. And I was like, okay. But again, it wasn't something that was a real life defining experience. Um, it wasn't until later, after I moved to Arizona in 1992 and started reading. I read the Bible and I started reading nonfiction material. I'd always enjoyed reading growing up, but as a kid, I was mostly into like comic books and choose your own adventure books and Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. And now, getting older, my reading started to shift, especially after I read the Bible. It's like I wanted to know more, particularly about history, to learn why we are where we are now. So, a book that came to my attention during that time was a book called The Great Controversy that I happened to find while I was uh, going to a local church. After I read the Bible, I just wanted to associate with other believers. So I figured might as well start going back to church. I hadn't, that's something that I hadn't done in about 10 years at that point. So it was while I was in church one day that I was looking at bookshelves and came across this book called The Great Controversy. And that was my first introduction to the Sabbath. And at that time, I had actually read myself into believing a different scenario of how uh, this whole issue with the redemption of humanity and the resolution of sin, how this was all going to play out in the final analysis. And in that original scenario that I developed or had adopted, um, the Sabbath wasn't a part of that. And this book, Great Controversy, was indicating that it was, but that book didn't really present anything that uh, discredited the perspective that I had already developed. So it wasn't until later countered the math that basically unraveled the view that I had adopted. And that left me wondering, where do we go from here? How is this all going to wrap up? And that prompted me to read The Great Controversy a second time. And then suddenly I realized that, oh, this issue with the Sabbath is something that I'm going to have to deal with. And then that prompted me to start observing the Sabbath day. So this is why I'm talking about this now today. And as I said, it's going to be things along this line every Saturday from here on out, because, it was a big shock to me to learn that the Sabbath day is in fact Saturday. It's not Sunday. And this gets back to the issue of the law. As I said, true law can't be repealed. It can't be abolished. It can't be amended. It is what is. So if the Sabbath day is the law, then that brings into question, how did Sunday become so ingrained, in Christian culture that people think that Sunday is the Sabbath? Well, that brings to focus the law of God versus the law of man. The fact of the matter is, the laws, if you want to call them that men legislate, bring into being, are not really laws. They're more like statutes and ordinances, because the so-called laws of man are subject to change. If you hire the right lawyer, the whole legal system is nothing but a gigantic game of words. So, the laws of man are always subject to interpretation. And not only that, they need some kind of system of enforcement in order to bring to people's attention that there are consequences for not going along with the law. You compare that to true law, the law of God. God doesn't need a police force to enforce his law. His laws, the consequences, whether it be a blessing or a curse, is automatically part of how a person relates to that law. That's why it says, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap." Because how we relate to law will determine the reaping that we will experience in regard to that. So this is something that is probably going to open up a can of worms with a lot of people. And I won't be surprised that most people are probably not going to watch these streams. They're not going to want to hear about this because, I posed the question in my first dream, can't we all get along? Well, ultimately, the answer to that question is no, we can't, because there exists in this world something called enmity. It's described as enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And that basically represents the law of God versus the laws of man, and who ultimately has the final authority in everything that goes on in this world. So I'm very much looking forward to going into much, much detail in the future on these things. But I want to share something that kind of serves as a wrap up for today's episode here. And after the children of Israel were delivered out of their Egyptian slavery, they were set up in the land of Canaan, which we call Palestine today, Palestine and Israel. The children of Israel were set up in their land, and the history in the Old Testament is somewhat tragic in the fact that eventually the nation was overthrown and taken into captivity because of their disregard of the law. And one of the people who was taken into captivity was a young man named Daniel. And if you've ever heard about Daniel in the lion's den, well, this is the Daniel that I'm referring to. And he was taken into captivity among another group of some of the brighter young people. They were taken first to be taken to the king's court to serve the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar. And during that time, you can read about this in the book of Daniel, chapter 2 in particular. The king has a dream one night, and this dream was troublesome to him. And when he wakes up, he can't remember the dream. So what he does is he summons the magicians and the astrologers and such people that were part of his court to help him remember this dream and to provide him with an interpretation. And of course, that's pretty much impossible for somebody to tell somebody else what they dreamed when they can't even remember it. And of course, that wasn't an acceptable response from the king. So he threatened to have them all killed. And that would have included Daniel and his 3 friends that are subjects of this book. But anyway, Daniel asks for a reprieve from the person who was supposed to carry out this execution. And basically, Daniel and his friends were given an opportunity to pray about this and see if they can be given some light on the matter. And as it turns out, Daniel was. And so he goes before the king to tell him what his dream was and the interpretation of it. And I'm going to read it to you as follows. O king, you saw and behold a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. His image, his head was of fine gold, his breast and arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. You saw till a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and of clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. And then he goes on to say, this is the dream, and now I'll tell you the interpretation thereof. He said, You, king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given ye a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into your hand, and hath made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. So King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, was the head of gold in this image that was in this dream that he had. But Daniel goes on to say, and after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee. Well, a study of history will show that the kingdom of Babylon was overthrown by the Medes and the Persians. So that would be the breast and arms of silver. And another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. Well, again, if you look at history, the Medo-Persian Empire was overthrown by the Greek Empire as it was under the leadership of a man named Alexander the Great. So we're seeing history being given in advance in this circumstance. And then it goes on to say, and the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as you saw the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas you saw the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Well, looking at history again, the Greek Empire was eventually overthrown by the Roman Empire in 168 BC. And then the Roman Empire lasted for many centuries after that. And then what transpires between the time of the Roman Empire and now is described in this prophetic imagery. I'm not going to go into detail of that right now. That will be talked about more in future streams on the Sabbath day. But the interesting point is the conclusion that Daniel gives the king in regard to all of this. He says, and in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. The dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. So, this kingdom of God that is to come at the conclusion of all of this is the successful society, It is literally the restoration of this planet back to the way it was before our first parents forfeited it to the adversary. And this is ultimately um, what my life is about personally. And this is really ultimately while I'm streaming. Everything else that I talk about in these streams is really focused on this bigger picture of the successful society. And as I said, I'm really looking forward to how this all unfolds because, as I said, the way I see it, it's already here. It's just a matter of people seeing it for what it is and being willing to participate in it. It's like the stone has already struck the image, and the image is already in the process of collapsing. And you don't have to look very far to see evidence of that. I mean, the way society is functioning right now, it's not even really functioning at all. It's very just dysfunctional. So fortunately, there is an alternative, and it's it's wonderful. So this is what I have to share today. I'm coming up close to an hour here, so I am going to wrap this all up. Just want to say thank you for those who were part of this today, and I hope to see you again next Sabbath day if I don't see you throughout this coming week. And yeah, so enjoy the rest of your day, everybody, and see y'all tomorrow. Bye.